Welcome to LawNext. On today's show, LawNext goes to the movies. Well, to a movie anyway, a documentary being made to raise people's awareness and understanding of the access to justice crisis in this country. My guests today are the film's director, documentary filmmaker Laura Hand, who previously directed a film called The Tent Mender about homelessness on Skid Row in Los Angeles, and also Maya Markovich, a legal innovation leader and previous guest on this show who's serving as a producer and advisor to the documentary. You may know Maya as executive director of the Justice Technology Association and for her recent appointment as vice president of the American Arbitration Association's Thought Leadership and Research arm. The documentary, called Justice, Just a Promise, has been given unprecedented access to film inside the courthouses of the Los Angeles County court system, the largest court system in the world, and one where litigants unable to get a lawyer present enormous challenges to the civil justice system. As this episode airs, the filmmakers have just launched an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign to raise the money they need to complete and distribute the film. Later in the show, you'll hear about that campaign, including Laura's surprising explanation of why she went that route to raise funds. So today we'll hear all about the film, the crowdfunding campaign, and how this documentary aims to raise awareness about a nationwide crisis that far too few are even aware of, let alone understand. I'm Bob Ambrogi, and this is LawNext, a podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Before we get to any of that, please take a moment to hear from the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Are you tired of making your specialized practice fit into generic legal software? Case is practice management software tailor-made for workers' compensation, employment and labor, and insurance defense firms. With intelligent features designed around your workflow, from automated document management to integrated billing and payment reconciliation, Case helps you practice law your way. Join the growing number of firms that have discovered the power of specialized software at meruscase.com. That's MERUS case.com. Returning to New York City, March 24th through 27th, Legal Week is the 1 week where thousands of legal professionals gather together to gain actionable insights, spotlight the latest tech, and explore emerging trends. Prepare to transform your practice, your network, and your perspective. Featuring 4 days of tracks, workshops, keynotes, state-of-the-industry updates, and premier networking, Legal Week tackles topics such as data privacy, discovery innovation, the future of legal AI, leadership, and much more, all while offering deep dives into the latest in legal technology. Register today at www.legalweekshow.com. Now let's get to today's conversation. Laura Hand, welcome to LawNext, and Maya Markovich, welcome back to LawNext.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thanks, Bob.
Looking forward to this discussion. And a little off topic, but Maya, let me just say on the record, congratulations on your recent move to the AAA. Really exciting stuff there. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. Yes, there's a lot of exciting work to be done on the access to justice front and also just with conflict resolution in society.
So as we are speaking, you are launching a funding campaign in order to produce a film, a documentary film about the access to justice crisis. The film is this a final title, I guess? Justice, Just a Promise, or is that still a working title? At this point, I'm not sure. You can tell us that, but let's kind of start at the beginning with talking a little bit about what the heck is this access to justice crisis. Even before we talk about the film, what's the topic? Why are you wanting to make a documentary about this? Laura, maybe you can tell us a little bit about why you want to focus in on this, and Maya, maybe you can help us kind of set the stage for what's going on here.
Yeah. I had no idea what access to justice was. I'm not in the legal profession at all. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I don't know about the legal profession. But I realized that I wasn't alone in not knowing what access to justice is. Most people outside of the legal profession do not know what it is. So that's why I felt compelled to tell this documentary story, because it's something that people need to know about, but they don't.
How
And I'm
did you
sure
become aware of it as an issue? I mean, what attracted your interest to making a documentary about this in the first place?
after I completed my last documentary, I wanted to focus on the justice space. Initially, I thought it was going to be criminal justice, and I spent many, many months observing criminal trials at the downtown LA criminal courthouse. And I began to hear while I was there about access to justice. Again, I had no idea what that was. I went to the LA civil courthouse one day and I observed a restraining order courtroom. And out of these 17 cases that I saw called, only one person had a lawyer. And I was shocked. I had no idea that that was not guaranteed. I did not know that in a civil court, you are not guaranteed an attorney. And when I was speaking with some of my peers about that, they didn't know either. So I felt like, okay, there is something here that is happening. There is clearly a problem, and a lot of people don't know about it.
The LA County Courthouse may be the epicenter of the access to justice crisis in some ways. But Maya, you've worked in this space for a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, kind of set the stage for what are we talking about? First of all, what is your kind of your background, your involvement with this, and what are we talking about? We're talking about the access to justice crisis.
So I came to know Laura through the Justice Technology Association, which is a nonprofit trade organization that represents startups that are building tech solutions to bridge the access to justice gap. We just started talking and understood. And once I knew she was in LA, I thought, the LA County Court is the largest court system in the world. And they are very, very innovative in the ways that they're trying to approach those problems. And at the same time, the sheer volume of what's coming through there on a daily basis is a very good example of what's going on, kind of writ large. So I am one of the producers on the film with through Justice Technology Association, and you will the sizzle reel has a lot of our good friends and entrepreneurs and activists that are working on this from all sides, actually. But anyway, so, what is the access to justice crisis? There's a few statistics. A lot of them are, frequently cited. In the United States, 92% of people that are looking to try to get through their legal problem cannot obtain any or enough legal support for these everyday problems, and they're excluded from the opportunities that the law provides. Anywhere between 75 to 95% of civil cases in the U.S. have at least one unrepresented party, and that, according to the National Center for State Courts, equals out to about 120 million people every year that are navigating a process that is stacked against them. And the U.S. is 107 out of 142 countries on affordability of legal support. So those are really like broad and kind of frequently cited numbers, but it really masks the racial and socioeconomic disparities that are pervading the legal system, which is that the wealthy have easy access to their constitutional rights, and the rest are left to fend for themselves. And that leads to a lot of unjust outcomes, overrepresentation of those without access to legal services in the justice system. And that ripple effect really goes so far beyond the individual to families and communities and entire demographics.
Laura, you mentioned the prior documentary about homelessness, which is called The Tent Mender, which, you must have encountered people in making that documentary who are kind of on the periphery of this access to justice crisis. And maybe you didn't even know what it was at that point, but I'm sure a lot of those people that you talked to even then were people who are just basically shut out of the legal system, even though they have legal needs and legal problems.
Yeah, prior to getting involved in this story in the justice system, I worked on a documentary on homelessness in LA. I wrote, directed, and produced it. We had an Emmy award-winning narrator, Peter Coyote. It was funded by Procter & Gamble, and we ended up selling it to Amazon. So it's streaming there now. And it's absolutely true. I was on Skid Row in downtown LA, and all these issues that we're discussing right now were happening just blocks away at the downtown LA civil courthouse. And I had no idea. And I think that you're so right, Bob. There are there is so much crossover there. There is so much, and people who are in need of their civil legal needs being met are not having those needs met. And as a result, I think there's definitely, I don't know if it's exactly tied, but I'm sure there's a crossover as to how these issues coexist.
Yeah. And as an aside, Peter Coyote being well known to anybody who ever watched a Ken Burns documentary.
Yes.
Um,
he's already signed on to narrate this documentary.
That's fantastic.
Yes, he's very passionate about this.
Oh, that's great. I know that you have talked about the fact that you're going to have access to the LA County Courthouse to be able to go in and film there. What are your plans? Can you talk about how that's going to be? To what extent that's going to be part of what you're focusing on? Is that the primary focus? How does that fit within this documentary?
Yeah, it was an incredible opportunity. We are the first documentary crew to have ever been given access to film in the downtown LA civil courthouse, actually across the county. We can film in any LA County civil courthouse. So I was filming
like
there.
5 or something, aren't there? 5 or 6?
5. Oh, I think there's way more. Huge.
Way more? Okay.
There's so many. But I was filming at the biggest one last week. And that was my shoot last week was kind of getting, this is more film language, but the B-roll shots, that are going to fill out the film. But for the actual story purposes, we are going to be able to follow a self-represented litigant in her journey as she's navigating the case by herself. And this particular individual, she actually will be telling it. And so we'll find out that like around the middle of the process, she's going to get a lawyer, and we will see how that pro bono lawyer, like what kind of a shift that makes in her experience of the legal system, the difference between being self-represented versus having a lawyer. And I've spoken to her at length already, and she has made comments to me about, as a self-represented litigant, I'm in the courtroom and I just feel totally powerless. And she said, I have now gone into the courtroom with a lawyer and I feel protected. And there is such a shift in that. So yeah, we'll be able to film her follow-up hearings.
That's really interesting. I've been to that LA County Courthouse, and I realize that they are very innovative in trying to address some of the needs of unrepresented litigants who come into that courthouse. But at the same time, the sheer quantity of self-represented litigants in that courthouse, it's like teeming masses and filling the halls of people who are there, trying to figure out where do they go, how do they file, what do they do. Maya, you talk kind of broadly about the access to justice crisis and some of the big numbers, the big picture numbers. But can you talk a little bit about this impact of self-represented litigants in particular, people having to go to court on their own, and what does that mean for them? What does that mean for the justice system?
Well, I mean, I was just, as you both were talking, I was remembering a LinkedIn post I saw a little bit ago from Mark Melton, who's a law firm partner, but also runs, I believe it's called the Dallas Eviction Center, Eviction Defense Center. And he had posted that he was in the courtroom representing some of his clients. And on the docket, there were 800 eviction cases in one day. And that, translates into about 60 to 90 seconds per person or per matter. And the vast majority of them were unrepresented. And so if you really want just one example of the just unbelievable level of disparity and what we're really talking about is not actually access to justice. It's a great term, but it's not actually what we're talking about. What we're talking about is access to a fair and level playing field so that decisions are made on the merits of the case and not on the potential bias against unrepresented parties.
Right.
I'd like to add something to that as well. Just how can you, I'm an outsider, right? I'm in the legal profession, but my thinking is if you're a self-represented litigant who is fighting for your rights, but you don't know your rights, how can you possibly do a good job? So I wouldn't even, I don't even, maybe there is bias toward a self-represented litigant. I don't know, but they can't even argue their case well if they don't know their rights.
Yeah, and
exactly.
I think,
or procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
what I was going to say. The procedure is often what trips them up more than anything, because
Yeah.
sometimes they just don't know how to initiate an action or respond to an action, or what they need to do or what they need to file.
And that would be me.
Right. That would be that. Frankly, I'm a lawyer. And that would be me in a lot of
That would
cases.
be most of us. Truly.
I mean, that's what's funny. There's some of us at least have the capacity to try and figure it out more, or the resources available to us to try and figure it out more. But that's part of the trouble. And then I think part of the impact of that is on the court staff, because they're the ones who then have to deal with that, who have to try and answer all those flood of questions that come in, or try and manage the misfiled documents or whatever else.
And that was something
Yeah. Go ahead.
That was something I observed last week when I was filming at the courthouse. The judge, she's fantastic, and she was really, really good at speaking in a normal language. You know how it's like, it's not like super legal terms. She was very good at speaking very plainly. But even still, she doesn't have enough time to really walk through the whole procedure with the person, because she has a whole long list of people she's got to get through.
Well, and, if they don't file it, in triplicate or hole punched instead of stapled, they're sent back around, which just continues to clog the dockets, to the point where you have 800 proceedings in a day.
That was something, Bob, you mentioned the crossover with homelessness on Skid Row. There were a lot of those kind of bureaucratic issues that were like difficulties with getting somebody into a center for the night. I remember I was trying to help a guy be able to stay at this place called the Weingart Center. And I wanted to give them like a credit card to pay for his night. I had to have a money order with the exact amount that I had to go get from the CVS. Mind you, this is in downtown LA. To get to the CVS and park your car, it's a whole thing. And you're expecting somebody who's living on the streets, who's already struggling with so many things, to navigate that. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. So how, I hear you've already started filming. I think you've already done some of the interviews for the film, but how do you plan to try and tell this story?
We're going to focus on a self-represented litigant story, and that will be the true focus subject of the documentary. And then peripherally, and sort of to set the stage of this larger conversation of access to justice, I'm going to interview all these different people within the legal profession. It'll be, legal academics from Harvard, from Stanford. We'll have state bar presidents. We'll have legal tech founders. And I really want to cover the range of people who are pro-regulatory reform and people who are anti-regulatory reform, and really get into the conversation. So that will be happening peripherally to the actual story of the self-represented litigant who's, struggling through the court system.
I wondered if you'd get into that regulatory reform issue, because that's sort of the hot potato here that a lot of people are debating and tossing around. Maya, you've been involved in that discussion on a number of levels over the years. So is that's kind of all through interviews, side interviews, conversations that are all built around the story of this one self-represented litigant then?
Yes. And Bob, I'll tell you something that I found actually very surprising in the interviews that I've been doing. I've done well over 40 now with different people in the legal space. And people on both sides are arguing the same thing, if that makes sense. So people who are pro-regulatory reform are saying that they are trying to protect the client by, increasing access to justice, by making justice services affordable for everyone. And then the people who are anti-regulatory reform are saying that they are protecting the client because they are keeping the client away from bad actors who don't have moral and ethical obligations to serve their client. So they both say that they are working in the best interest of the client, but they just come at it from different angles. I've found that incredibly fascinating.
Yeah. In the courthouse context, it's even more fascinating because, so many of those people who are arguing that only lawyers should be able to do this, when you see those people in the corridors at the courthouse as self-represented litigants, those are people who are not going to be able to afford a lawyer, for whom there isn't enough legal services lawyers or legal aid lawyers to take their cases. They're not going to have a lawyer. I don't know the story that you're telling, how it is that this person was able to transition from not having a lawyer to having a lawyer. But in most of these cases where so many of these people are self-represented litigants, it's not even an option for them. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm. Very true.
We're discussing the upcoming documentary Justice, Just a Promise, with filmmaker Laura Hand and producer and advisor Maya Markovich. We've heard about the genesis of this documentary and why Laura and Maya consider it so important that it be made. When we return, we'll discuss the crowdfunding campaign and how it came about after Laura's attempts to secure more traditional funding from within the legal industry fell on deaf ears. But first, please take this opportunity to learn about the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Your specialized law practice deserves more than one-size-fits-all software. That's why Case was built exclusively for workers' compensation, employment and labor, and insurance defense firms. Every feature, from smart document workflows to precision time tracking and automated payment reconciliation, is tailored to how you actually work. Stop adapting your practice to generic software and start experiencing what true practice management software should be. Visit meruscase.com to see the difference. That's MERUS case.com. In an ever-evolving legal market, there's one thing that stands the test of time: great client service. That's where Lex Reception comes in. Their agents are available 24/7, 365 days a year to answer calls, qualified leads, onboard new clients, and schedule appointments. With bilingual agents and software that can seamlessly integrate with your current workflow, you'll never miss a call or future case. With over 12 years of experience, Lex Reception gives lawyers the time and freedom to focus on core legal work and helps them grow their firms, all while building their reputation for great client service. Check them out today at lexreception.com. We'll go back to LawNext, where I'm speaking with filmmaker Laura Hand and producer Maya Markovich about their documentary Justice, Just a Promise, which aims to help raise mainstream awareness and understanding of the access to justice crisis in this country. Laura talked earlier about how her observations in LA courtrooms revealed to her the overwhelming challenges faced by self-represented litigants, and how this documentary will follow one such litigant's journey through the civil justice system. As we return to the conversation, we'll hear about their crowdfunding approach and why traditional funding routes failed to pan out. We'll also talk more about what they hope this documentary will accomplish for the millions of Americans struggling to access their legal rights. What do you hope? What are your goals for making this documentary? What do you hope to bring about because of it?
When I look at a company like Uber and how they totally overhauled the rideshare industry, they had a ton of pushback at first. The regulators did not want them. The taxi drivers did not want them. The only way that they were really able to overhaul the rideshare industry was because the consumers demanded it. And it made things better. It made things better for the consumers in the end, but it was really because of the consumers in the end, because they were aware of it. With access to justice and this whole crisis, I just don't think that people are aware of it. So my goal is to bring some awareness. I think that storytelling is the way to do that. And similar to a self-represented litigant who, if you don't know your rights, how can you possibly advocate for them? if you don't even know that this crisis exists, how can you possibly demand any change?
So do you see, is the audience for this people who are completely unaware of this, or is the audience in some ways those who are aware but maybe not well educated on it?
Both. I think that this affects all of us, so everyone should care. I think right now the conversation is only happening within the legal profession, but I think that this is a conversation that needs to be happening mainstream, and that's the goal of this documentary, is to bring it to the mainstream.
Yeah.
I think the best, for me, the way that I've been sort of explaining and thinking about it is that it's a consumer issue. It's a consumer protection issue. It's a consumer's rights issue. And I think everybody on all sides would agree that we're all, as Laura said, we're acting in our opinion on what's on behalf of what's best for the consumers. What we really need to do is hear from the consumers themselves. And we also need to understand that the consumers need a broader awareness that there are specific reasons why it's very difficult to get legal support in a moment of crisis.
And that's
let's air those out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I noticed with all my interviews. People who are pro-regulatory reform, people who are anti-regulatory reform, no one denies that there's a problem. Everybody does say that there is a problem. So at least everybody agrees on that.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to deny because it's very, again, when you go to a place like the LA County Courthouse, it's very visible. It's hard to deny it.
Yeah. I mean, it's visible, but then I truly don't think people sort of extrapolate it, more globally. Because I was just talking to a colleague who is in the access to justice space, and when I mentioned the 120 million people per year going through unrepresented, he was just like, "What? 120 million?" It's like, yeah, I mean, there are numbers around this, and also, I mean, there's also a huge opportunity, right, for new approaches to make a significant dent in that massive crisis. So,
yeah, isn't the statistics something along the lines of 80% of all civil cases in the United States have at least one self-represented litigant involved in them? It's something enormous like that. That may be not the right number, but it's a shocking number in terms of the numbers of people who are going into court or going into legal court proceedings anyway without a lawyer representing them.
Right.
Do you plan in the film to kind of paint this picture of what's happening, or do you plan in the film to be able to offer some ideas about how to solve this problem?
I want to paint what's happening and let the interviewees speak to the problem. I'm a storyteller. I do not know the solution. I will not claim to. So I want to make sure that the problem is well addressed. We will definitely see it happening, playing out with the self-represented litigant story. And yeah, the conversation sort of surrounding that, hopefully some of the interviewees can speak to what they think are the solutions. And by hearing from, people who are much more knowledgeable about the subject than I am, ideally the consumers will be better informed then to have their own opinions.
Yeah. So let's talk about the funding. You've decided to launch this. I think as we're speaking, you're launching this as an Indiegogo campaign. Tell me about the campaign and why you've decided to take that approach.
Initially, I was going to use the same funding approach as my last documentary, which was a brand-funded content model. It's not a widely known structure because it's difficult to do well, but for some context, historically, for a brand to be able to get its message out to people, they had to pay for commercials. And then they would have to pay more money to a TV streaming service or YouTube or wherever to get those commercials aired. And it just puts them in this perpetual state of having to pay for media. And nobody was ever really happy with this structure because they couldn't really ever identify whether an increase in their sales was from a 30-second spot that they shot. With brand funded content, it works entirely differently. A director, someone like me, will identify a story that is authentically aligned with a particular brand's mission. What do they care about? What is the core ethos of that company? And then rather than the company paying money for commercials, they will pay to fund a piece of content. In this instance, it was a documentary. And then out of the production of the documentary, they'll of course get those commercial assets, and they will additionally get earned media. And that's the value here, is that they are sitting on this really interesting story that they will then be able to go and talk about in press write-ups, podcasts, film festivals, morning shows, lots of earned media that they'll get out of it. The reason that this works is because the brand, their mission is authentically aligned with the story. So the brand comes out looking really good in a really organic way, and everyone essentially wins. Now, in the case of what I did with Tide, so Procter and Gamble funded it, specifically Tide.
For the homeless documentary.
Yes, with the Tent Mender.
Yeah.
And rather than going and paying for commercials to talk about Tide's mission, they funded a documentary. They got an ROI immediately, a cash ROI, because we sold it to Amazon for way more than the amount of money that they put into it. And then they got earned media out of it because we went and spoke at CES and different morning shows and film festivals. And so they got a lot of just earned media from the process of it. And the reason that it worked was because their mission was aligned with the story. Tide's mission was that clean clothing gives a person a sense of hope and dignity. And I wrote a scene into the documentary where you actually see Tide build out a laundry room at the oldest homeless shelter on Skid Row, the Midnight Mission. So they came out looking really great. Now, the obvious application of this model in this instance would be to identify brands who are access to justice aligned and have them come on as our brand partner. And I'm sure you know this, Bob. There are dozens of those that are writing on LinkedIn and X every day about how they care about self-represented litigants, and they're citing the Legal Services Corporation statistics. And I was able to get in touch with some of the C-level executives and mostly their CMOs, and none of them were interested. And I was shocked. And after some reflection on it, I thought, this is part of the story. Here was an opportunity for them to be able to be part of spreading the awareness of access to justice, and they didn't want to participate. And not only did they not want to fund it, they didn't want to participate in it. And look, I get it. Everybody has their own marketing budgets and their own spend focus. I totally get that. But in my experience, it's only lawyers really that know what access to justice is. And here was an opportunity to bring this topic into the mainstream conversation, and they didn't take it. And it's just been very hard for me to rationalize why that is if somebody says that they're for access to justice. So that's a long way of saying this is the reason that we are doing a crowdfund campaign. I've never done one of these before. I've never had to. I'm working on 2 other documentaries right now, and this is not an issue. So I don't know how it's going to go. We'll see.
That's really interesting, that backstory, and I'm surprised too. I mean, part of it may just be the budget. I mean, I know you said you're looking to raise $100,000 through the Indiegogo campaign, and there may be some companies that just said, "Whoa, that's our marketing budget isn't quite there yet." But I would think also there are a fair number of legal tech companies that could easily afford that, and you're right that it would be right on mission and right on brand for what they talk about. So I am surprised about that. And I'm sure, I don't know, and I'm sure Maya offered you some advice along those lines as well in terms of companies to talk to. So how does the crowdfunding campaign work?
So we're going to release the link and people can go check it out and see the sizzle reel and participate in becoming essentially a partner with us and bringing this story to the mainstream.
Yeah. And are you looking for donations of a particular range? Do people get anything for being supporters of this campaign?
Yeah, you can visit our crowdfund link to give you the little perks that we have to offer. But honestly, any amount that somebody can donate is extremely helpful. It will help us be able to fund the production. We're going to be flying to a few of the big legal conferences to do these interviews. So that will cover for the travel and the filming there and our crew. And then we'll be filming in the courthouse and funding our Emmy Award-winning narrator and film festival submissions.
Yeah. Which conferences will you be at? Do you know?
What are the two biggest conferences?
Depends where you're looking, but it may be Legal Week, ABA Tech Show, ILTA. Those are some of the main ones.
I need to get a conference where I can get both legal tech founders and state bar presidents. Do they show up to any of the same ones?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, no.
All right, so I might need to do two separate.
Yeah, you might have to do some different ones.
Well, I mean, the other thing I just want to add is, I mean, much like at JTA and most nonprofits that I know, where and schools that are doing annual fund campaigns. I know this very well from my two kids every year getting hit up for this kind of thing, and really the amount is less important than the number of individual donors, right? I mean, the idea is to show that there is a groundswell of concern and awareness that the story needs to be told.
So what's the timing from here? Again, I understand you've kind of already started down the road of making this documentary. What's the overall production schedule? When might we actually get to see this released?
We are already working with the self-represented litigant. I obviously do not have the control to say pause on her legal journey. So we are already working with her. But the conference schedule, a lot of these things will depend on the funding. So the sooner you want to see it, the sooner it needs to get funded.
Reach into your pockets and
exactly
put up that money. Yeah. What would be your ideal? I mean, if the campaign were to take off pretty quickly, are you looking to have this out within the year, or
yes.
Is this a longer process? Yeah.
If we can get this funded quickly, it's definitely possible to get it out this year.
That's awesome. I know we talked a little bit about what you're hoping to achieve from this, but do you think there will be, I don't know, kind of a takeaway, a call to action, whatever, for people who see this documentary ultimately? I mean, are people going to get up and start calling their bar associations, or what might be the action that this could motivate, if anything?
I'm of the mindset that stories are kind of the first step to having any change. So telling the story is imperative. It's the beginning of everything. It shapes what you're thinking about. It shapes culture and it shapes our future. So I think getting the conversation outside of the legal profession, getting people to know about it. I've heard people call this the civil rights crisis of this generation, but I'm telling you that most of the people in this generation don't know about it. So I think awareness is the first step, and what those individuals choose to do, well, I mean, what moves them, I guess.
Yeah. Maya, what do you think? What are you hoping to see come out of this documentary?
I think it depends, a few different things. It kind of depends on my mood. Sometimes sometimes I'm just, discouraged that there isn't public outrage about this. And I think that a lot of it is sort of just sort of resignation to the status quo. and or that it doesn't seem solvable or approachable really in any way. I also think that there's a lot of hope, right? I mean, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic for the fact that things can actually really change, especially with the advent, of what everyone's talking about, generative AI and the ability of technology to do a lot more, if provided that it's, within ethical boundaries, and thoughtfully created with the kind of input that is needed, which is the input from the user. And I think that ultimately the combination of those two is what I'd really like to see. A little bit of outrage that this has gone on so long, but also a sense of, burgeoning opportunity that actually we're at an inflection point and things can actually, there are increasingly there are solutions out there that can help, and that we need to make sure that the path is cleared for those solutions to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, I think this is a really exciting project. I think part of the problem with the whole conversation around access to justice is so much of it is preaching to the choir. The people who talk about it are talking to the people who are already aware of it and care about it, but the word just doesn't get out beyond that very much. And this sounds like a really great opportunity to help illustrate what this problem looks like and what it means. So I can't wait.
That is certainly the goal.
It is. And I mean, I, for one, am incredibly grateful that Laura finds this interesting enough to pull something, this huge together, because I think it's one of the really key pieces that we've been missing, just like you said, Bob.
Yeah. All right. Anything else that you'd like to say about this that we haven't talked about?
Thank you for having us. And I hope that your audience is as equally excited about it as you are.
I know some of my audience will be. I can't speak for all of them, but I know some of my audience will be.
No, I mean, the more people can get the word out about, obviously about the campaign, but also just at a broader level, that this is something that's coming, I think is and to get really excited about it, I think would be great.
Yeah, good.
Stay tuned.
Well, thank you so much. Pleasure to talk to you, and pleasure to meet you, Laura, and good to talk to you, Maya, as always.
Thank you so much, Bob.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments, please just drop me a message. You can send me an email, ambrogi@gmail.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn or other social media. And if you're a fan of the show, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. LawNext is a production of LawNext Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. Please join us again next time for another episode of LawNext.